Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Spiegler, and I'm the Assistant Director for Strategic Initiatives at the Columbia Center for New Media Teaching and Learning. I'm very pleased to introduce this session, which marks the launch of a new strategic initiative at the center that we call Global Learning. The idea behind Global Learning is to create international collaborations that strengthen education and advance solutions to critical global issues. We think we can do this by leveraging newly available and affordable web-based networking technologies. Our flagship project within this new initiative is the Global Classroom, and that will be the focus of our presentation today. Can you bring up the webpage? The Global Classroom was launched as a pilot last semester and continues this fall. It brings together students and faculty from universities on 6 continents for a weekly, live, interactive classroom experience for master's level course in sustainable development. Our faculty partners on this project are Jeffrey Sachs, Kettleett Professor of Economics and Director of the Earth Institute. Most of you probably know who he is. He could not be with us today. And John McArthur, Adjunct Professor at the School of International and Public Affairs, who is with us today. The course serves as a practical demonstration of a new model curriculum developed by the members of an international commission co-chaired by Professors Sachs and McArthur and charged with inventing a meaningful and effective education for a new generation of practitioners in the emerging field of sustainable development practice. We're pleased to have John as a presenter here today, and in addition to his role at SEPA, Professor McArthur is Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of Millennium Promise, a non-governmental organization working to end extreme poverty in Africa by the year 2025. Professors Sachs and McArthur lead the Global Classroom course together at Columbia, and Professor McArthur will share with us what it's like to teach simultaneously on 6 continents and identify some of the benefits and challenges he sees to this approach for education and the practice of sustainable development for the future. In addition to Professor McArthur, and to start out our presentation today, we'll hear from the 2 people most responsible for the implementation and operation of this complex project. Katie Murphy, Project Manager for the Commission, and now Deputy Director of Secretariat at the Earth Institute that will serve as a hub for a new master's degree in development practice. That master's degree was announced in SEPA last week, and we're really pleased to be joining that project. Joining her will be Rob Garfield, CCNMTL's educational technologist, who was given the daunting task of making this project work. So, without further ado, Katie.
So as Jennifer mentioned, the concept behind this new type of global classroom really emerged from the work of the International Commission on Education for Sustainable Development Practice, which was led by John McArthur and Jeffrey Sachs, with the core aim to identify education programs that would create a new standard in the field of professional training for sustainable development practice. And this idea really sprung from the experiences that John McArthur and Jeffrey Sachs had working in the UN Millennium Project when they were tasked with the responsibility to identify a practical action plan to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, which are the time-bound, agreed-upon targets to reduce poverty, hunger, and disease by 2015. So coordinating with several groups of experts in various fields, so they were working with agronomists and economists and gathering information, they really found that while specialists may have significant contributions within their own field, often those contributions are lost on the ground because there is no one there to really coordinate and to gather the insights from various fields to develop integrated solutions that are really required for the kinds of complex problems of poverty, disease control, climate change, and these issues. So with that in mind, and with the encouragement and support from the MacArthur Foundation, John and Jeff brought together a group of 18 top thinkers in the field of sustainable development. And so this included Dr. Jim Kim, who's at Harvard now, but also the former director of the HIV/AIDS program for the World Health Organization, Ann Veneman, the executive director of UNICEF, Helene Gale, the CEO of CARE, and a team of all-stars who have had significant experience working in this field and shared the common understanding that there needed to be this new type of generalist practitioner who understood the fundamental core knowledge in all of these various disciplines and would be able to effectively coordinate between them. So the Commission's first work was to identify the competencies for sustainable development practice. And they worked together to identify a set of knowledge and skills that they felt that every sustainable development practitioner needs to be effective. And this could be grouped into basically 4 categories: natural sciences and engineering, social sciences, which includes policy and economics, health sciences, which includes nutrition and management. And from there, the task of the Commission was then to develop effective education programs that could really achieve and accomplish build these competencies, so that the graduates from these programs were ready to hit the ground running after a rigorous 2-year program and begin working in the field. So in the thick of this discussion, when we were trying to come up with a plan for developing the master's degree program, I think it was Jeffrey Sachs, in his typical visionary fashion, threw out the idea, why not just create a course that combines all of the elements of this complex curriculum into one condensed semester class, and let's have real-time participation from each of the Commission members, since each of them represented various fields, and let's connect universities from around the world and students and teachers, and let's start it next semester. And so that was sort of my assignment, and as project manager at that time, it's sort of what fell on my lap. Luckily, I had great guidance from John McArthur, who also was very involved from the beginning in the development of the project. But at that point, I was also very new to Columbia, and I wasn't really even aware of what kind of resources there were in terms of developing this new type of educational technology. So luckily, I was led towards Frank Moretti and his team at CCNMTL, and they were extremely helpful and enormously instrumental in developing this whole project. I think I arrived at Frank's office and told him that we need to make, we have 6 months and we have to have real-time participation from universities around the world, and we need to make it happen. And luckily, he didn't kick me out of his office, but he was very gracious, especially when I tended to be very demanding and persistent. So some of the initial challenges that once we started working together, we identified 3 kind of real initial challenges that we would need to confront. And the first was deciding on the model. We knew that the idea of having real-time interaction was important, but we weren't sure how much that would really work given the variety of universities that we were working with, the variety of technological contexts in each situation. So we had to struggle with that for a while. The second was mobilizing partner universities, trying to ensure that there was a great group that really represented the world. And then third was identifying the best technology. So we'll go into these 3 in a bit more detail. So as I mentioned, the beginning of this idea was to have real-time interaction with the experts and the students and the teachers from around the world. And as we started to really think this through, we knew that this was such an important opportunity to have R.K. Pachauri, the Nobel laureate and the chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have him teach a course. And so we didn't want to risk it by relying only on technology. And since we could capture these lectures, we wanted to ensure that there was another format other than just the live interaction to really flesh out this curriculum. So we agreed upon having pre-taped lectures so that each of these commission members would provide an hour-long lecture that we could upload to a course website, or if needed, send them by mail, or however we could get the materials to the different sites. We could ensure that there was some real core content that took advantage of the knowledge of this amazing group. So the four main elements that we decided on were the syllabus. We wanted all the students to participate in one common syllabus. We allowed for some tweaking in various universities, but we really felt that it was important that they were all engaged in the same problem solving and really focused on the same issues. The second was the pre-taped lectures, and then we wanted to still include some type of live interaction. I think that's really important for creating this community of global problem solvers, having them participate in real time. So, and then the third was we were hoping to have them do some type of shared investigation or some practical assignments that would allow them to digest the materials and really think through practically how they would think as practitioners in the field of sustainable development. So those were our four kind of ideals. And then Rob can go through some of these beautiful diagrams. So Rob Garfield was the, I guess, the lead educational technologist for this project. So he was really instrumental in making everything happen.
Thanks, Katie. As Katie mentioned in the last slide, those elements of the course, I've got a little height issue here. Those elements of the course that she mentioned were the ones that we really ended up deciding that we wanted in the course. But to begin with, all we had was really a promise that we would have a number of the commission members available to record lectures. So our foundation, I'm not going to say the core, but our foundation was a set of pre-taped lectures that are sort of video texts that would, as I said, form the foundation of our curriculum. We also didn't know who all our partner institutions were going to be, but we needed to get started on a pedagogical model that covered from the least common denominator to our ideal setup. And I'm going to start with the least common denominator. And this is assuming that we were going to run into connectivity issues such that simultaneity would not be possible with all of our partners. And in this first model, the rudimentary model, up where it says taped lectures, you can say course materials. You can substitute course materials for that. And then unidirectional arrows that go out to the participating institutions. So basically, in this model, participating institutions are looking at a common place to get, or a common set of materials to use in their own local executions of the course. You can go on to number 2. And you can hit it twice, too. Because the drama is not, I don't have time for the drama.
No drama.
In the second model, we've added networked events, which is our first attempt at bringing people together in a simultaneous situation. These networked events, we imagined, could be anywhere from the top end of a really flushed out video conference to a smaller sort of broadcast event, more one way, to say online chatting, online forums, what have you. But the arrows at the bottom indicate that adding some kind of networking to this whole program, this whole course, actually starts moving us in the direction of a global classroom, where the pedagogy on the local scale is now bleeding into other universities and affecting those and feeding back into their local executions. In Model 3, again, you can go twice because there's no drama. In Model 3, we've added, I think, this is probably our biggest leap up. We've added common activities, basically. A local research project. We had institutions all over the world with very unique situations in each of them, which we thought was a rich field for pulling out unique testimonies and unique analyses to the problems of sustainable development practice. And not only do we have the local research project, but now the local research project is going into a common repository that is shared amongst all the participating institutions. And we've also added common assignments to further link activities across the world. Model 4. Model 4 is pure genius. And I'm just going to sit here silent for the next 2 minutes. Okay, my time's up. No, in Model 4, this is really our ideal setup. In Model 4, not only do we have all of the things that I mentioned before, but our network events are simultaneous interactions, real-time interactions, trans-institutional engagement, the opportunity for institutions to work around the clock together, for students to talk to students, teachers to talk to teachers, and all of the commission members involved in that mix as well. We've also added collaborative assignments, and you can imagine a local research project on, say, a larger scale topic in sustainable development, say situation of water and importance of water around the world, and in Qinghua, China, and in Mekelle in Ethiopia, and in Colombia and New York City. There are a lot of different issues involved, and a number of institutions talking about those issues and understanding each other's issues has the potential to lead to a lot more of a sort of global understanding of the issue in general. Oh, drama.
There was drama.
Okay, and then now I'm going to
Yeah,
pass
the
it back off to
gobstopper.
Katie to discuss our everlasting gobstopper of student activity.
This is just a description of how we kind of envision the course functioning in terms of there's a core curriculum which involves the content, the materials, and then how the course kind of expands outward. So I don't think this is necessarily a perfect depiction, but the idea is that how a course like this can affect larger communities of practice, can affect the local environments of a whole global kind of network. So the next challenge that we talked about was mobilizing the partner universities. Luckily, we started with a great group because many of the commission members themselves were affiliated with universities, so we started working with them. But we wanted to ensure that there was broad geographic distribution. We wanted to ensure that we could get as many participants who were really serious about creating perhaps a new master's program in development practice or similar types of initiatives. So basically it was a lot of outreach, and it really came down to identifying local champions within each of these institutions. So in universities where there were faculty members who were just very excited and enthusiastic about this project, those were the ones that ended up becoming part of the core group. And it was an interesting way for us to gauge kind of the interest level of these different universities in kind of the broader goals of the commission. So these blue arrows represent two different cohorts of the global classroom. So in our initial group, we had 11 universities and one organization, and that launched on January 22nd in 2008. We're now in our second semester, and we have now expanded it to offer the course to some organizations and universities who act more as participants. So instead of really interacting in the real-time discussion every Tuesday, which takes place here at Columbia at 8 a.m., in Tsinghua at 8 p.m., in in India at 5:30 p.m. Instead of participating in all those, there are some who just observe. So you can see we have a great representation across 6 continents, and it's becoming a pretty interesting, vibrant network. So I think Rob's going to talk a little bit about the.
So our next topic of conversation is the actual technology that we ended up using. Again, back to the foundation of our common course materials. We needed a course management system that everybody had access to, and many different layers of permissions for it, which I can talk to you offline afterwards. It's a little bit complex, so I don't want to take up all of our time. We came up with this implementation of Sakai, and this is our main, what you're seeing now on the screen is our main course management system. I'm not going to go over everything because we have a lot of similar elements that I'm sure most of you are aware of in a course management system, such as syllabus, calendar, lessons, assignments, resources, as well as useful links. But one thing I did want to highlight here is if you could scroll down just a little bit, Jennifer, to get to the collaboration tools, is really became a focus of ours. I mean, as it should be fairly obvious that one of our biggest challenges is getting people to communicate across large distances. And we decided to include collaborative and communication tools within the CMS as well. We have forums, which Jennifer is showing you right now. And the way the class works now is every Tuesday morning, and it's at 8 o'clock here, and oh, you did that? Okay, that's fine. Yeah, every Tuesday morning we have our synchronous discussion, but students can also collaborate and communicate over the forums as well. And if you remember those spidery diagrams I showed you before, which illustrate a sort of central location for course materials and a local execution of them, we now have an analog in our course management system for that. Jennifer just showed you the main website for the global classroom, but now we have these sub-sites called project sites for each participating institution, so that they can run their own classes on a local level as well through the same system, sharing the same material.
What? Do you want to run? Do you have a slide? Sorry,
Yeah.
Katie. I'm sorry.
So then just
Sorry.
finally, we needed to solve the challenge of figuring out how to get everyone online in various parts of the globe. As you have seen, the network was pretty large, and so we had to deal with certain challenges in China, such as they have a crazy firewall system, certain challenges in Africa, such as bandwidth, and we had to really identify what the capacity was for each of these institutions to participate. So we were able to identify a relatively low cost and very effective form of web conferencing that we use. It's called Adobe Connect. Not to advertise for them, but they've served us well. So, but it's a great way that we use to ensure that the conversation continues. We also use a telephone line so that the audio remains steady, because we did several tests with some of the partner institutions, and bandwidth is really a serious issue in many of the schools that we work with in Africa, and so we really want to ensure that there is a quality conversation that people are able to listen to each week. And of course, there's always lots of technical glitches. We have problems sometimes with people muting their phone or other noises or feedback that we might experience, but all in all, it's been a really exciting experience to have everyone online for the first time. And you can see in the next slide, the first class that we had, so this was back in January 2008, and we were still holding our breath to figure out if it was really going to happen. And you can see on the screen, each of those little boxes represents a different classroom around the world. So we have Sciences Po in Paris, we have UIDE in Ecuador, we have Tsinghua in Beijing, IDS in Sussex, Malaya, we have Ibadan in Nigeria, and even Terry in New Delhi down there. So it was really exciting. That was the first day that we had everyone all together, and just a really terrific moment, I think, for everyone involved.
We roll tape.
Now you'll see a live action clip.
The idea of the global classroom is that by joining together in this very special way, we can use technology to the maximum to have a better international understanding and international exchange about these issues.
One is from Babika from Sudan and the other one is from Akila from Nigeria. Babika, you go first.
Yeah, my question, just we appreciate about the information you gave us about African agriculture today.
Because the situation in Africa is still very hard, about 65% of the rural people and 25% of the urban population don't have access to clean water.
My name is Mark Bing, I'm from Sierra Leone. I'm a budget analyst by profession, but having got this remarkable knowledge from different practitioners around the world, I'm looking at myself in the long term. Maybe not only sitting in the Ministry of Finance and doing analysis, which sometimes does not directly impact on poverty. So if I want to move on into having things that directly impact poverty, using the skills I've learned here, I would like to, in the long run, what I'm thinking about is fighting poverty from within.
Yeah. If you go back to Sierra Leone and there's a mining company or a palm oil company or someone else that's doing something and you approach them and say, look, you have to do a social development project, you can always count on us for backstopping you.
Great. So we have today with us John McArthur, who's the CEO and Executive Director of Millennium Promise, and really it's his ideas that are behind all of the work of the Commission, and he's provided terrific guidance throughout this process, and he's also one of the main faculty members for this course. So he can speak directly about the experience of actually teaching in this experiment.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the presentation. I think it's a terrific synopsis of a lot of the key issues and a lot of the key mechanics and a lot of the key practicalities of taking this forward. Maybe I can just share a few quick reflections on, especially as we look back at 1.5 semesters of this undertaking, what types of problems it solved, and it is solving first. Secondly, what some of the successes look like, and then maybe what some of the next steps might look like, because we really think this is self-anointed guinea pig status in which we want to be, opening ourselves up to maximum partnership, maximum exposure, so that this can be hopefully a constructive force for much broader activities of this form. So just taking a step back to this global commission that we've been part of, the classroom was really quite interesting, and it basically helped address 3 problems as a classroom. One is that we felt that there was, in this commission process, an inadequate exposure to different disciplines within most academic training programs. So if you're studying development, usually that means you're studying watered-down social sciences or watered-down environmental sciences or political science or something. You're not actually really learning the various components of development, which in real life include health, they include agriculture, they include economics, they include climate, they include all these things. And so getting exposure to the cross-section of issues in an academic setting is actually quite rare, and was the original kernel of the idea that led to this But a second, I would say, problem that we realized we were trying to solve is within each of those areas, how to add layers to the discussion and how to add perspectives to the discussion. It's one thing to teach a course at Columbia and say, here's what it's like in China, here's what it's like in Africa. It's another thing to be having that discussion with someone from Africa, with someone from China, and with someone who's not from either of those places who has a totally different perspective. And so adding those layers of discussion within actual topics was quite important. But then a third one, as Katie alluded to, which I think is quite important, and I'm, as a macroeconomist of the view, having worked a lot in policy environments, think it's actually quite essential, and we still haven't got our heads around it, is there's a notion of global problem solving that we're not teaching people to take on as a mindset. And so this course, ultimately, it's maybe the deepest point, is thinking through for these core issues of hunger in Africa, climate change, water scarcity, economic development of China, what does that mean for the world? Migration, communicable disease, non-communicable disease. These are actually very often global challenges. And we actually need to start training people, in my view, to think about how to solve global problems through global problem solving. Not through me doing it, not through you doing it, not through someone else doing it, but through us doing it. Because that's the only way the problems will be solved and implemented in any successful way. So it might seem a bit of a leap to jump from a classroom in front of a webcam to global problem solving, but I actually think it's quite a succinct connection. And we've seen it in that clip that was maybe a little bit inaudible of the student talking about going back to Sierra Leone and how he's going to work in the Ministry of Finance. That was actually, for me, one of the high points of the class, was that he said this was the best course he'd ever taken in 2 years at Columbia, and he'd been, guys worked in the Ministry of Finance on path-breaking problems in that country coming out of civil war, and he said he'd never had the chance to learn so much and to be part of a global undertaking, and he's now going back to Sierra Leone to work in the government with that in his mind, and that network as part of his day-to-day work. That's quite important, actually. They're part of an alumni list of a few hundred, just in the first pass. And this was a survey course. So we're working across disciplines, we're working across institutions, we're working across cultures, and we're working across continents. And the core idea is that all of those things should be normal. So this is a little bit innovative, and there's hosts and hosts of hiccups on a day-to-day basis, but all of it should actually become normal. And so that is, in a biggest picture sense, I think a lot of what we're trying to solve through this effort. Pedagogically, there have been many interesting things come out of this, like, wow, if you can get a lecture on macroeconomics of development from Jeff Sachs, why would you go to any other lecture? Or if you can listen to Pachari talk about climate change, why would you go to any other lecture? Or Jim Kim talk about AIDS control. And it actually opens up, if you could have thousands of people attend that lecture every week, it really, or even vastly more, which this all of a sudden enables, you can have then incredible access to the global thought leaders on particular issues. There are limits to it, of course, because you can't have a global discussion with 10,000 people for an hour. It doesn't work so well. So one of the things that we've, I think, just started to think about in a systematic way is, how do you capture that hour of that person's time, because they don't have a lot of time, distribute that knowledge to as many people as possible, and then have local discussions, maybe with teaching guides provided by that person, after a bit of an interaction, to really facilitate that through a local professor in a local seminar, so that they're empowered by it and that it's a boost for their own classrooms. So specialized global lectures with localized class discussions and seminars, I think, is a theme that's emerged from this. Another thing that's really emerged from this is that this is a tremendous way to provide access to areas of a curriculum or of content that some institutions would never otherwise be able to provide. So Tsinghua University in Beijing, for example, is an eminent institution in that country, focuses mainly on social sciences. They can't do agriculture at a faculty level. They don't want to hire a Department of Agriculture just to teach a course for a PhD economist student. This actually provides them a way to do that. They can actually have their students take a course in disease control or water management or some subset of those things through a global classroom, partnering with the institutions that provide actually those forms of content. So it actually helps round out the curriculum in many instances for institutions that otherwise wouldn't be able to provide it, which is good both from an economic perspective if you're a student in rural China and you still think you should be able to learn this stuff. And it's also good from an institutional perspective if you want to maintain your specialization, but also provide access to other areas outside your specialization because those are important. So we had, I would say, through this, and it's important to stress how cheap this was. This was basically $1,500, apart from all the human hours, which are invaluable. It was a pretty cheap infrastructure. This is literally orders of magnitude cheaper than video conferencing, which I've used for the past 10 years. Video conferencing typically costs a couple $100s an hour. It's very difficult technologically. The network systems are very different. This is just a $1,500 system through the web. So incredibly cheap and incredibly accessible. This actually made it possible. And one of my favorite moments of last year was to have incredibly distributed classes, even on the lecturing side. So we had a moment last year where Jim Kim from Harvard was in Ottawa because he had meetings with the Canadian government. Helene Gale, head of CARE, was in her office in Atlanta. I was facilitating the discussion in New York. We had a dozen classes around the world. And a student from Sudan who was studying in Malaysia was able to ask a question on the double disease burden, communicable and non-communicable disease, of two of the world's leaders in infectious disease and public health. And everyone around the world was part of that. And they were able to do it, crucially, Jim Kim and Helene Gale, just from where they were that day, because they could get in front of a webcam. That level of access, to me, changed the way I think about it, actually. I actually joined Facebook after that, because I said, the world's a little bit different. I got to get over it. So those are some of the highlights. Another one was just this, 2 weeks ago, we were having a discussion on engineering, climate, energy systems, which got into a little bit of climate, but maybe energy systems. And we realized, wait a second, we have the people from the Ministry of Energy in Mexico online. They'd been listening only. We said, what are you guys doing about energy policy? And they gave a 5-minute riff on energy policy in Mexico. It was fantastic. It was exactly the type of global conversation you would never get those people in their offices if they had to, actually sign up for a course or go to an institution even down the road. So we have a lot of these great moments, I would say. Not to say that there are no hiccups. There are challenges around the weakest link phenomenon in the technology. So I think getting the platform, as far as we've come, there's a lot of how do you make sure that the platform is seamless? What are the real ways to have a command and control center to get rid of the fuzz from the connection in southwest Nigeria? There are things like that that affect the global discussion. It takes a lot of work and it takes some expertise, I would say, to facilitate a global discussion through webcams. This is not a natural thing for most people to do, but it's doable. To provoke and elicit perspectives from students is a real challenge of the effort, but I think an important one that when it works very powerfully. To pursue joint assignments, I would say, is something that is one of the most exciting parts of this, having institutions from around the world work together, like on climate change, if this was mentioned. If you had the student in Ethiopia working with the student in New York and the student in China on a joint assignment on climate change, that's actually part of what that global problem solving looks like. In practice, it turns out, if the academic calendars are different, it's of course hard to do. But these are some practicalities that we're working through. In terms of next steps, finally, we and Dr. Lucia Rodriguez here, who's leading the work in the Secretariat here at Columbia, are really trying to build the open source aspect of this. So just to conclude where I started in the nature of building this up, getting the best ideas, and having this be as broadly accessible as possible. We're looking to really build a library of curricula and courses. We've used this cross-disciplinary microcosm survey course as just that. It's a test run. There's no reason why there couldn't be global classes in economics, agriculture, anthropology, and so forth. We're going to be doing this as part of our own new graduate degree program we're launching here with about a dozen institutions around the world. But we'd certainly love to work with others in the room on that. Second is actually just to build the network. We have, I think, about 600 or 800 people on the line on a weekly basis right now. It could very easily be thousands and tens of thousands with even hubs and spokes, different time zones. It's actually very hard for the West Coast to join this right now because 8 a.m. East Coast time is perfect for everywhere in the world except the West Coast because it's 5 a.m. there. So except for the students who are still up from the night before, most don't want to come. So that's just one practical example of the need for regional discussions. And then finally, I would say just really building up the interface. There's a lot of technology to be mobilized. We're operating on a modest budget. I'm sure if we had Cisco, Google, and Microsoft on the case, we would be very quickly looking at a very different interface. And I know that there's a lot of the virtual meeting technology that is being used now and launched. We're not operating at that price point, but I know the price point is coming down extraordinarily quickly. And this will open up many, many more options for global collaboration in the years ahead. So let me stop there and just say I think this is a remarkably important step forward just in our own work here in thinking through what educational systems look like for development professionals. But hopefully it's an important contribution for other institutions that want to build up their capacities to deliver new types of material and new types of joint learning for their students around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And we look forward to joining in that project with you and not only perfecting the global classroom as we can, as this technology really comes into reality, but making that global MVP an accessible repository of information that people can share. I was very impressed last week when Freddie Quasiga said, "We need information." And he's an agronomist from Africa. And despite everything, what he said they really need is just information. They have the talent. They have the dedication. And I think that as we work together, we can make that a reality for everybody. I want to really quickly say a couple things about our Global Learning Initiative, which is starting off with this incredible project and hopefully blossoming out into 1,000 points of light that are similar, but probably not identical. While the commission members in the global classroom were focusing their energies on creating their new curriculum, we were thinking at CCNMTL about how the global classroom could help us reimagine the educational possibilities that could be enabled by networking technology. And our hypothesis for the Global Learning Initiative is that through this type of networked engagement, a global education community, starting with faculty and students here at Columbia, can begin to work together to build and spread knowledge faster and more broadly than ever before, and to create a culture of cooperation that marks real and fundamental change. And we set about to establish some criteria, and Rob, if you could just hit the PowerPoint, I think I have a criteria slide for anybody who is thinking that they might be engaging in one of these projects. There's a website that you can go to off the CCNMTL site, which is our global learning site. under strategic initiatives. But we came up with a set of criteria that we thought were really key for projects in this domain. They should have an international reach. They should represent broad diversity, both cultural and economic. They should have as a goal to foster positive change, because we're really interested in this being a footprint going forward to solve real problems in the real world. We want these to have active collaborations across institutions. So these are hands-on, getting people engaged and working together as a modality. And that the communications in these interactions are multidimensional, and this is a really important point. Each partner in the global classroom and in our thinking about global learning initiative projects is about distributed learning and not distance learning. It's about each node on the network being equal and not following a hierarchical, the first model that Rob showed, the top telling you at the bottom what the reality is. And we're really committed to that. So yes, technology is imperfect, but it sparks the imagination, and as John points out, the cheaper that technology gets, the more imaginations it can spark. And that's where solutions can begin. And with that, I think if we can buy 5 minutes for questions, is that possible? In the back? Does somebody have a microphone? Somebody in the back.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know, I was just observing that Russia was not on one of the list of places you collaborate with. Any particular reason for that?
Yeah, unfortunately, the distribution of universities that we have right now isn't perfect, and we're constantly looking for new partners. And currently, we do not have any in Russia. So if you have some great contacts, then I would look forward to receiving them.
We started with the friends we have. Nothing exclusive, just, in the nature of life. Oh, here's 12, let's do 12. So it's all very much open-ended for growth.
I'm a microbiologist trained here at Columbia, and I worked for the US FDA. I've experienced as a professor of microbiology and also as an analyst. I've also took some courses in Teachers College. So my suggestions, which I shall make here, just in brief, they may help the people who are working on this global classroom, because I've recently brought out a publication called Earth Cell, which goes specifically towards this question of a negotiation and mutual understanding between different races, different peoples. And I've chosen the ideology of symbiosis, which in biology means just like the plant and animals collaborate together, and in the lichen we find an alga and a fungus living as one individual. This theory of symbiosis is very appropriate in education, I think, also in politics. So a few suggestions I can make with regard to the project of interaction. There's great difficulty in going from a model to have a proposal that actually works, because the model may be very abstract, it may be very theoretical. So my idea would be this peer-to-peer education, which I would call, it's a kind of an atomic project, because I'm using the basis in an atom bomb, where if you have a single molecule of plutonium, when it is excited and start exploding, it meets any of the other particles, which also become activated, and thus the explosion of energy is spread. This peer-to-peer project would mean that a bright student in a classroom would take about 2 other individuals who are really far, far behind, and then they would work in a peer-to-peer project. And then in the end of the year, after carrying out this project, you would see if the teacher-student model has produced more or equal to the peer-to-peer interaction, which has been used in developing countries, especially in India. I've seen people who are laggard are taught physically, basically on the spot, on the job, and they're able to produce great results. You have heard of the microcredit by Eunice, who was given a Nobel Prize, in which women given $20, had to bring in the commitment of adding some money, and then they would raise the fee of returning $50, and then to $100. Finally, they would buy a bicycle, and finally be able to send their children to school. I'm very interested in the lab portion of this educational project, because in this lab portion you have less of the theoretical, which can be just blah, blah, blah with no enforcement, which sometimes happens in Congress. We have so much legislation going on and on and on, but the enforcement is very, very poor, you know. So in having this peer-to-peer project of comparing how students can study from person to person, and it has already been proven in Africa and in
Sorry, sir, I know we're short on time. I'm just wondering if there's
let me conclude
a question.
Then. You have other examples in Venezuela where children of 12 are able to play instruments for a whole population. The obstacle to this project, from the U.S. point of view, I feel, is we have prejudice against nations like Venezuela. So that is a big obstacle towards realizing this global classroom, and we should take very seriously about it.
Great.
Because that is what says, oh, this is all hokum, this is all bullshit, you know.
Thank you so much for those observations. Does anybody else have a question? Back.
Hi, I'm a new graduate student for international education at NYU. I come from Colombia, and I would like to know what's the criteria for the selection of the institutions that you have now, because I'm kind of interested to know, like, if it could be possible to do it in Colombia too.
I think the criteria is to be interested.
Yeah, we pretty much opened up the doors to anyone who is willing to work with us. There's not even a fee to join the Global Classroom, although there's some small incremental costs for the telephone line and things like that. But really, we were open to including as many as possible.
In the back.
Thank you. My question is, it seems like, okay, one second. It seems like there's some dynamic tensions in this. In other words, you want to make it available for free, which sounds great, but then how do you pay for it? And you know, given, I mean, Columbia has an endowment, which is great and helps deal with that issue. So how do you deal with the free versus the pay part? And then the second issue, on the one hand, you want to have everyone equal or some equality, but on the other hand, you have, you know, the one expert that gets to do the lecture, like Professor Sachs, who is great. But, you know, so where do number 3 and number 4 world experts fit into a course like this that aren't number 1 and number 2?
Maybe just on the first point is we're talking about creating global public goods. So that's really important to stress, is that this is meant to be open source technology. And, you know, the McArthur Foundation is supporting this, not the Columbia Endowment, as much as anything. And that's a great contribution they're making. I would also stress this is not meant to be a monopoly, and so it should not be misunderstood as such. This is meant to be just an example of how this can work. If we had 1,000 global classrooms on the same topic led by 1,000 professors, that would be fantastic, and the market would sort itself out in terms of what people wanted to go to. And there should be diversity in these things for sure. My point on the specialists and the kind of returns to excellence in the specialists is just that this provides a much broader way for people to get access to those specialists. But there are, of course, limits to that ultimately in terms of the interactivity with those specialists. And no one is ever saying only one specialist should be listened to on any issue, because they're never right all the time on anything anyways, so, and shouldn't pretend to be. So this is meant to be a model that shows a potential way to expand this, but we're hoping that, and I anticipate actually that 10 years from now, for example, this will be much more of a norm in educational systems than an exception.
Yes. Okay. I'm sorry. I know this is, we could go on forever with this conversation, and we will continue on with this experiment. Anybody who wants to learn about our initiative, go to our website. If you want to learn more about the Global MDP Secretariat that will be in charge of moving this into a sustainable model, You can talk to Lucia Rodriguez or Katie Murphy or get their numbers from me. So thank you, John. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks so much.